In episode number 1 of the Everyday Actions podcast, I interview Christian Dailly, the ex-Scotland and West Ham captain. We talk a lot about his career in football, how he learned through trial and error, and actually through a lot of injuries, of actually how the body worked, and his fascination to find out more. He retrained to be a sports scientist and now runs an amazing organisation over in Essex called Zone 1 with his business partner Emma Pideaux. We talk about how metabolic health can really make a difference to everybody's well-being. We also talk about his everyday actions, and we talk about the things that are non-negotiable for him. It's a fascinating listen. I really hope you enjoy the first episode of the Everyday Actions podcast. And if you do, please subscribe. Thanks so much. So, Christian Dailly, welcome to the Everyday Actions podcast. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. You are our very first guest to the podcast. I'm absolutely delighted that you said yes to it.
I'm delighted as well. Yeah, having had you through our process here at Zone 1 Health, it's been kind of great to see you making the improvements that you have, and it's a pleasure to be on your podcast, especially number 1. I like that. It's good.
So, yeah, I mean, it's been a brilliant 3 months working with you and Emma. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much on a personal basis. And of course, it's not all about me. This is about you, this podcast. But it's been a brilliant journey, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that as we go through the conversation today.
Yeah, brilliant.
So why don't we start at the beginning, which is going to be the format for the Everyday podcast, which is why don't we start at the beginning, which is tell me about your background growing up in Dundee and your kind of the early part of your life.
Yeah, well, I mean, very fortunate, really, I would say. Came from a typical Dundee family, but great family, very sporty family. I'm the oldest of 5 children.
Okay.
We never really seemed to want for much, and despite the fact that we never overly well off or anything like that, we just seemed to have what we required, and just a real sporty feel, I would say, to the house in general. And just from a young age, just seemed to want to play football. I enjoyed running around and enjoyed playing football, and I ended up being the thing that I just wanted to do more than anything else. I used to go and watch my dad play. My dad played like semi-professionally.
Okay.
And he used to he was actually president of a semi-professional football club while he was actually still playing. He could have been a professional football player himself, but he actually turned it down. Back in those days, you had this decision to make between earning money and becoming a footballer. So he went down a slightly more academic route and became a civil engineer. Mum was a teacher, and so we just had a great upbringing and loads of sport. I just had a garden and a ball, and I was happy. So I had a small garden, a ball, and a net was put up in there, and I just spent my days doing that and going up to the park and just playing.
So when was the first professional contract?
So I mean, I actually signed for Dundee United, which is my boyhood team, when I was initially on what we used to call S forms, and I think I was 9 when I did that.
Okay.
And so I was already showing up something then, and I signed my first professional contract when I was 16. But by then I'd already played for Scotland under 15s. So my last year or 2 at school was pretty much interrupted by Scotland under 15 schoolboy stuff, which was and it was an amazing experience. We won the British Championships, beat England at Old Trafford actually, and I was captain of that under 15 side. But one thing that was great for me at that time, though, I had some adversity. I'd actually not got in the side the year before, although I was a year young. The type that I thought that I'd done enough to get in that team and assumed that I would get in. And it got down to the last 26, and then they chose a squad of 18 for that team for Scotland under 15s, despite the fact that I was an under 14. There was also there was also a World Cup in Scotland for that age group that year. So, but then I was one of the 8 that didn't get in. So that was quite a bit of a kick in the teeth, especially because some of the players from my club, Dundee United, at the time actually got in that side, and I was one of the ones that didn't. In fact, I think I was the only one of the ones that was in the trials that didn't get in. So, but I look back on that actually and think it was a good thing, because I see this a lot these days. People are protected somewhat from some forms of heartbreak or things maybe not going quite the way they would like it to go.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's really important for people to experience some of those setbacks.
Absolutely.
And then you see how people deal with it from there.
Yeah. I think that's true with life in general, right? Which is probably our greatest lessons are from setbacks and the tougher times in our lives, right?
So then I signed my first professional contract with Dundee United when I was 16. And I went from playing boys club football in the May of that year, I think it was 1990, to actually about 2 months later I actually made my debut for the first team, and I scored my first 3 games as a striker. So it was an amazing transition into professional football for me, and it was all I ever really wanted to do. And I always just wanted to be the best, but that was the best at anything, whether it is always, even then, I was especially interested in the physiology that underpinned what allowed me to do what I was able to do at that time. So already, even at the ages of 14, 15, 16, I was already buying magazines on fitness and health, etc., and trying to learn how to improve myself. And that was always off my own back. And so that stayed with me my entire life. So there's something in there even then that was driving that, and I just wanted to obviously test myself all the time in all those different parameters.
Amazing. So that was when the kind of curiosity of metabolic health started, really. If you look back, is that right? It
was, and I'm probably my own biggest case study. I mean, I've made so many errors, and I've tried everything.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting, and but even then, that's like you said to you. Although you probably weren't thinking about it so much from a health perspective, I was definitely more thinking of it more through the lens of performance, and a fitness type of thing. It's been with me all the time, and I always would win all the testing and all the physiological testing that they would do at all the various clubs that I played at during my entire career. And I was always just fascinated as to why that would be the case. What was it I had? What was I doing? What was it other people had? What did they do? Was it linked to what they do? Was it something that was inherent in them? These things have always fascinated me. So that's been a continued journey, and in a sense still trying to work it out. But we've got to an unbelievable stage now over the last 10 years doing what we're doing here. That we've got to a stage where we've pretty much worked things out. And my goodness, I wish I knew then what I know now. I'd probably have had about 10 operations less than what I ended up having in my football career. I think overtraining was probably my biggest problem, actually, because I was just trying things all the time, the whole time. Literally, my whole career just spent trying things. And but it's been well worth it, because I can now pass on what I've done. I can make sense of it now, and I can pass it on. And it's been a very powerful position to feel like I'm in, having that level of experience.
So from Dundee United to where?
So from Dundee United, I played there for about 6 years, and then I signed for Derby County, and when I was about 22. And I mean, right through, I've been very lucky. Jim Smith was the manager there, but Steve McLaren was the number 2 there. Obviously, ended up the England manager. He was a young up and coming coach there. And then went to Blackburn, where I was signed by Roy Hodgson. And then I think it was about 24 or something then. And then ended up at West Ham, and where I played for about 8.5 years or something. I spent a little bit of time on loan just before I left there. That was at Southampton, which was great. Then I signed for Rangers, played there for 1.5 years. Already by then, I was using a little bits of the methodology. I was coaching athletes by then, I've been coaching athletes basically since the time I was at West Ham, young athletes in particular, but also all athletes in all levels. And I was able to use some of the knowledge that had accrued to take it into athletics, but also I hope to learn within the athletics world. And we could probably get into that, because I certainly learned some things, and I also definitely learned what not to do as well with athletes. I saw something that's still prevalent there today, and I don't like the way that athletes are coached in this country. The system doesn't work, and in the main it doesn't work. But already when I went to Rangers, I had an amazing setup when I went to Rangers. I actually commuted to Rangers, to Glasgow, for a year and a half from down here.
Did you?
And the manager, Walter Smith, he was my coach at Dundee United when I was about 14.
Oh, okay.
And he was the manager of Rangers. And he tried to sign me at various times throughout my career. And he knew what I was like as a person, and the type of dedicated athlete that I was. And he said, look, would you come up and play for us and fill in different positions? But the only thing is I ask is that you don't ask to play every game. And bear in mind, I was already 35 years old by then, so I was completely understanding of that. And also, he said, also, if you want, you can commute if you want, because I'd asked him about that. And what that allowed me to do is experiment with basically certain types of training that would enhance my metabolic health and longevity.
Okay.
Potentially my longevity within football. So almost separate the longevity side of my physiology from the performance side. So I think if I trained in the way that I was already developing there, I could set up this youthful physiology to then take that into my football training when I went up there, when I did train. So I meant I did less football training, specific football training, but I also played matches, which was good. But I did a lot of physiological work that underpinned what we term metabolic health and longevity type work. So we're already starting to experiment with that, then different exercises, use heart rate monitors, and how I would cope nutritionally, etc. Things like that, already experimenting with things like that. And that worked brilliantly. I did that for a year and a half there. And it was very successful year and a half. We ended up winning the league once, I think won the Scottish Cup twice, won the League Cup and got to the FA Cup final in that space of time. And that was a great experience to go and do something like that, but to also test out some of this work. And from there, I went to Charlton for 2 years at the latter part of my career, where I ended up getting Player of the Year in the first year I was there. I think I was about 37 or something then, 37, 38 years old, before I ended up retiring. So it was a brilliant sort of little transition from trying everything to start to come around to the way the body functions, how starting to work myself out, starting to implement it with athletes and seeing the reaction they would get. Because if you treat the body or hypothesize how the body's evolved to function, and you start to try things, experiment, or use case studies, if you're right, you should see adaptations. And the more skilled and knowledgeable I became, the more I start to be able to just basically guarantee adaptations. And so that's been a fascinating process to get to that stage. And the reason why I actually stopped playing in the end was because I was 2 years into 5 years distance learning sports science degree.
Okay. And
I decided to spend I'd already done 2 years of it while I was playing, and decided to dedicate my entire life to the last 3 years of that, and that only. And it gave me a brilliant foundation to access the literature to then do what I'm doing now. So that was really worthwhile, just having that foundation. The sports science degree in general was great, and I really enjoyed it, but I actually ended up doing it in a completely different way. I did it in my own type of way. I had a different methodology for doing it, and I think they've actually revamped the course slightly off the back of the way that I was coming round to it. And because you've got to be able to apply these things, it's so important. The application of this work is so important. It's not just theory, it's the application. And that's where we come in, because I can tell you now straight away when we're looking at something that works or that doesn't work or that should work, certainly in the longer term, whether it will work. And that's what we became good at. So yeah, it's been a fascinating time.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously talks are, our mantra at Black R, which is everyday actions, right? Yeah. And It's not the knowledge, the literature, the science even behind it. It's actually taking the actions in line with the science and the literature, and that's the point, isn't it? It's kind of, it's very much trial and error, isn't it? Because whilst the learning is there, until you actually put it into action and actually do it on a daily basis, you don't really know what the results are. And I've been working with you and Emma now for 3 months. Personally, the results have been amazing. But you've got to go through the actions. It's the actions that make the difference. It's not just you saying, here's the process, this is the process. It's not as simple as that.
No, it's not. It's actually doing it. Yeah. And that's the key. And it's hypothesizing that something will work, but then you've got to test the hypothesis. That's the scientific method of thinking.
Yeah.
And if you're wrong, you're wrong. And you've got to be prepared to go back, and you've got to adjust, and you've got to come back in with a slightly alternative way of doing it.
Yeah.
And but like you said there, just if there's something that you can do every day, that is an amazing way to think. We love the work that you're doing on that, those everyday actions that you talk about, and it's something that we've incorporated in what we do. We love the fact that the methodology we have, it becomes not a am I doing something today? So it's no, what am I doing today?
Yeah.
It's what have I got on today?
So obviously, a professional athlete learns a lot from your own training.
Yeah.
And I remember when we first met, you were telling me, a lot around overtraining and how detrimental that can be in terms of performance. Certainly short, but also long term of the effects of overtraining. So obviously a very well documented and very successful playing career, come out, sports scientist, dedicate your life to kind of really working that through. Just talk to us a little bit about the if you like, the four main prongs of your methodology of Zone 1. Tell us about the thinking behind it.
Well, I mean, training is meant to be about adaptations. That's what training is not just training for training's sake. It's training for adaptation. So when you go to the doctor and he says, yeah, you need to go and train, I mean, it's the people, what you tend to find is that, and especially in the athletics world and what people do in general, there seems to be this mantra of like no pain, no gain. But that doesn't explain why when we don't do that, we see massive gains in people's physiology and their health status, So over time, we've ended up coming up with, there's three main parameters that we really look at. We look at people's nutritional status, we look at their strength, and we look at their aerobic system. And we've got ways of monitoring those. And that's the key. We actually put objective numbers on those. Yeah. And those numbers relate directly to the metabolic health status, which is fascinating for us. So it might be something such as some if you look at someone's endurance, for example, or the aerobic system. So we have an index that we can actually look at on that, and it tells you objectively whether you are actually getting fitter aerobically. And of course, we know that people who exercise appropriately, for them, it enhances their longevity and their health in general. They're free of conditions. They'll lose body fat, they'll lose visceral fat, they'll increase their muscle mass. And if we can actually show those adaptations and actually show people when they're also getting it wrong, it's amazing the difference that can make. And what we found over time is, and it's reasonably well documented, if you look properly, know what you're looking at, is that you find that you can do far, far less and much easier work and much simpler work than you think, and have huge metabolic health gains and performance gains. That was an area we were completely determined to master. We had people who ended up with, people who were generally obese sometimes, but also people who maybe had type 2 diabetes, people who had, we actually look after people who had Parkinson's and people who had cancer, but even things such as polycystic ovaries and erectile dysfunction and I mean a whole host of metabolic health conditions, or that have a metabolic health related underpinning. We start to look more and more after people like that, and that was for us when we'd worked out how the body functions and realised the implications of that, not only for someone at an athletic end, but at the end of where just a metabolic health end, and that underpinned everything. We thought, right, it's time. It's almost, we owe it to ourselves and to people to actually start to put this out somewhere so that they can have access to that. So that's what we're in the process of doing now. It's been really exciting. That's what you've just done. You started the process of going through.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing, and it's I can recommend it to anybody. It's potentially life-changing, and it really, I don't say that lightly, it really is. And in terms of, it's not just not about feeling healthier, it's your whole well-being. And I think that's the thing that you and Emma kind of cracked more than anything. It's more than just one aspect, and it is. I know it's the cliche that gets used, but it is a way of life. It's a way of living, as opposed to, and it's all about longevity. And I think that's the thing I love about it. It's not just a quick fix thing, and it's absolutely in line with what we do at Black Isle, which is it's about everyday actions. It's breaking a big goal. I mean, a big goal. One of the biggest goals in all of our lives is health and well-being, and it's breaking that down into bite-sized chunks in order to be able to do things that are going to ultimately deliver results. And of course, we're all in a results-driven industry, and you can see the results. Personally, I've seen amazing results, and it's not just the numbers; it's just the general well-being of the combination of intermittent fasting and low carbs, all of the things we've done, and the whole kind of zone 1 methodology of training. Really, I personally didn't think I would probably run much more ever again, and now entered the London Marathon, and really looking forward to running it. But it's because it's broken down into bite-sized chunks, into everyday actions. And for me, of course, to my core, I believe that, but it's a process that everybody can adopt. It's not just, as you say, for the sort of the top end athletes. So 2 more questions for you. First question is, what are your everyday actions? What are the non-negotiables that you have, that you do every single day?
So again, I tend to fall back on my own way of thinking around my own system. I mean, I definitely fast every day. I make sure I have, at the moment, I'm actually fasting. I only eat once a day at the moment, and I eat my entire nutritional content within 1 meal. I do that, but it's not something I've always done, and it's not something I'll probably always do. It's just one of the strategies that we have, and it's a fascinating one for me. It fits in brilliantly with what I do at the moment. Interestingly, enhanced muscle mass, lower visceral fat, which you wouldn't think, from what would seemingly be just eating once. But my muscle mass has gone up, which is really interesting, fascinating. Again, there's a way in which I'll eat certain amounts of, for example, there's a certain amount of protein that I'll get in every day. And I'll try and exercise in some way every day. And that is always done around how we work, because we have to be quite dynamic, have to think on my feet a little bit. So we've actually created a system whereby the exercise which we do, no matter whether it's aerobic exercise or strength-based exercise, that we can get a huge amount from very little time. So, for example, you could choose one exercise that we do and be only doing it for maybe 20 to 30 minutes and have a huge adaptations, get real long-term adaptations from that. The way in which we train, I'll give you an example. We've got a 71-year-old man who has Parkinson's disease, who trains each of the exercises that we do once. We tend to focus on about 4 exercises. He does them once every 2 weeks, each exercise every 2 weeks, in blocks of 2 of the exercises. And he has made adaptations continually.
Brilliant.
For every single week for about 7 months now.
Amazing.
Which is absolutely unbelievable. So it just shows you the way in which we put those exercises into place around their nutrition, that you can get incredible adaptations without having to overtrain completely. But from going back to my own personal every day, that's the things I do every day. I make sure every day that I'm trying to enhance my physiology in some way by at least manipulating those parameters from nutrition, strength, and aerobic system development parameters. I get to do less aerobic stuff at the moment because I spend so much time in here looking after people. But the same physiology that you would look to enhance from those, or from that aerobic system work, you're looking to do with your nutrition and with your strength training as well. There's a methodology behind it, and we're enhancing those. So I'm always looking to enhance one of those every day.
And broomstick?
I do the broomstick every day. So that's become, it's funny you saying that, because that's really interesting, because that has become just something that's such an everyday action that I actually don't even think about it. But yeah, every single day, we come in the morning, we walk in, and the first thing everyone does when they come in here is they pick up the broomstick and they start to work through the bits of work that we put in place.
Yeah.
So, and it's
trust me, I think about it because it hurts.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel sorry for Emma, actually. Emma spends probably about an hour a day doing that.
Oh.
But she's become so robust. It's incredible. It's an amazing work. Yeah. And we use that work to set the foundation for all of the other exercises that we use. And that's been an incredible thing that we've developed over time. And we're actually loving the thought process behind that.
Brilliant. So just to close off the podcast, and thanks so much for coming on again. Just to close off, what would be the best piece of advice that you've ever been given in your life?
I mean, I suppose the best advice I've been given, I suppose, of what I would potentially give is to question everything.
Okay.
I'd question everything you hear. I spent most of my life listening to people who are in good positions of power and good positions of authority, I would say. And they were definitely wrong. Okay. But I was such a good lad that I tended to just go with what I was told, quite often without questioning. That was always slightly complicated by the fact that I also had a very scientific mind, and was always struggling to work out why the things I was told to do didn't necessarily transfer into the things that I was doing, despite the fact I was told that's exactly what would happen. So that's why I think over time it's one thing that age gives you and experience gives you, and the knowledge gives you, and that's where I feel in such an incredible position at the moment. We've applied what we do in here so rigorously with every person that we've had in there over so many years that there's almost nothing we've not seen now, and we can spot straight away when someone is probably wrong. And I think that's the fascinating thing. A lot of the systems that are around these days in almost all walks of life tend to be very, very ordinary and would only provide a very light foundation in general, whether it doesn't matter which system we're talking about here. But I would question everything, because you probably find what you really want to have is an environment where you can be the best that you personally can be, and you can express yourself the most that you possibly can. Yeah. And that quite often would mean doing something completely different, but actually is the common narrative. And that's the difficulty that we will have, is because now that we know what we know, we can't unknow it. Yeah. But it also means that it's at times very different to what is traditionally done.
Yeah.
And which is a great position to be in. And but it's also just makes it that little bit more difficult. But one thing that we do know that ultimately in the end we're so far ahead of the game, but all roads will lead here eventually, because it has to. Because every new monitoring tool that comes out, basically, if it's about metabolic health, it'll drive people exactly towards what we do, because we've worked that out. And so that's what's fascinating. Even something like a glucose monitor. If we look at if you take a continuous glucose monitor, put it on your arm, and you were to put in exactly the nutritional strategy that we have had in place for 5 or 10 years, if that means anything, and you've got someone with type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes or any metabolic health condition, and that gives you a number, and you want that number to be exactly what the doctors will tell you exactly what they want to see, you do exactly what we do. Yet that is not what's done. And that's what we find not right. That's not fair. So we know what to do. And so that's what we do. So we now are very bullishly implementing it. And we see that anyone in a position that's in the medical world who's not advising that, it's malpractice. You have to do this. And because we've got numbers on it now, and that's why we love some of those technologies that are emerging, because all it's doing is showing exactly the answers that we'd worked out before. That's really cool. So yeah, question everything.
Question everything. That's brilliant piece of advice. So look, thanks so much. Two counts. Hey, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast. It's been fascinating hearing. I'm a big fan, as you know. Secondly, thank you so much for the work that you and Emma have done with me. It's been brilliant. It's been a brilliant journey.
You look to me like you've lost something like 6 kilos of subcutaneous and visceral fat. You kind of look like that in 12 weeks.
That's
not bad.
Correct.
And don't get me wrong, if I'm not mistaken, you've lost no muscle.
That is true.
So that's cool.
Yeah, and it's been a great process, and it's been brilliant working with both of you. I really enjoyed it.
It's been brilliant working with Jeremy. Yeah. Looking forward to do more in the future as well.
Okay. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
For coming on. Thank you.